In this video, I'm going to walk through how I'm playing Triangle Strategy for the Nintendo Switch, hands-free using voice controls and a head mouse. There's a few other videos out there that are using the same hardware that I'm using and similar setup, but I'm doing things a little bit differently that I thought it would be worth showing this off, and maybe it will help someone else. So you probably noticed right away that I'm using a capture card to stream video and audio from the Switch to my PC, and I'm playing through the preview in OBS. This is definitely not strictly speaking necessary, but it does make some of the features I'm using with the mouse a lot easier and more natural, having the mouse cursor visible on top of the game like this. That being said, it definitely adds a pretty significant cost, and I'll talk about that later. I'm going to do a quick demo of some of the functionality to give you an idea of how it works, and then I'll walk through how it's implemented. Talon Wake. Show empty overlay. Back. Back. Pan. Walk. Reset camera. Pan. Walk. Reset camera. So Talon is the voice recognition and control software that I'm using, and it's responsible for basically turning the words that I was saying into keyboard presses. It's also responsible for drawing that on-screen overlay and looking up where the mouse cursor was. The other software involved is something called GTuner. This is talking to a piece of hardware called Titan 2, which is connected to the Switch. This is how the PC's key presses are being turned into Switch USB inputs and emulating a Switch controller. There's another video from these folks at Game Access Special Effect who talk through setting up a very similar system using a Titan 2 GTuner and some different voice recognition software. So I'm not going to walk through exactly how to set it up because frankly they've done a better job than I could do, but I will talk about how I've configured GTuner and the Titan 2 specifically. So there's two parts to the configuration I have in GTuner. The first is what they call the input translator. So you can open this in this input translator tab down here and get these mappings. This is going to map keyboard inputs into Switch inputs. So you can see that it's fairly basic. I have the letter A bound to pressing the A button, letter B pressing the B button. The directional arrow keys are driving the D-pad. The analog sticks are just bound to a bunch of letters here, and I'll walk through how these analog and D-pad inputs are driven by Talon and the mouse cursor. The other part of GTuner is a scripting system. I'm not super familiar with all of the possibilities here. I've seen some pretty complicated scripts out there, so I suspect that you could do some interesting things. What I'm using this for is being able to give more granular inputs to the to one of the analog sticks. In the input translator, when you're pressing one of these keys, or in my case, saying a Talon command that inputs the letter, it's basically pushing the stick in whatever direction in like the 100% way. So pushing this stick all the way up, pushing this stick all the way down, etc. But obviously these are analog sticks, and so there's an analog option. and in the scripting layer you can give a more granular amount. So I've bound for triangle strategy. I found that there was some scenarios where I wanted to only push the stick about halfway, and so I've bound 4 letters to push one of the sticks in the halfway direction, and I'll demonstrate that in a little bit. So aside from the input translator that I've set up and this script, which I've loaded over here, you can see both of these are loaded on one of the memory slots on the Titan 2. The other thing you need to do with GTuner is use this capture mode. So this is what's going to take the PC's inputs, in this case from Talon, the keyboard presses from Talon, and GTuner will capture them, send them to the Titan, and then on the way to the Switch. So that's what I'm doing here when I press enter capture mode here. I'll start with a demonstration of the D-pad and then walk through how the analog sticks are implemented. Talon wake, show empty overlay, Talon sleep. So you'll notice that I'm using OBS's full screen preview. Obviously it's a little bit more enjoyable to play the game, but it also means that these on-screen regions that Talon is drawing will line up with the actual game. So because the game is this isometric grid-based battle, I've got the D-pad bound to the corners. So when the mouse is in the upper left region here, and I make the popping sound that Talon's listening for, it'll push up on the D-pad. When I make that sound in the lower right, it's going to push down. And then right and left are bound to the other corners. Because the popping sound is sort of a discrete sound and the D-pad is a discrete input, I find this quite comfortable to use in terms of just kind of moving the cursor around the screen and planning out your turns in this game. But the analog sticks are useful in obviously many other games, and in this game as well. I'm using the analog sticks for the camera, which I'll walk through now. So the camera is controlled using one of the analog sticks, and it's the same idea. I've just bound it to the upper middle, lower middle, and then the left and right regions. And the other thing I've done is set it up so that when I start using the camera, I can stop using the popping sound. Talon wake, pan, pan, Talon sleep. So you can see when I say the word pan, Talon enters this mode where it's waiting for me to move the mouse and it's looking at those regions. When I pop, it stops pushing the button. The last thing I'll demonstrate here is just the way the menus and issuing commands works. So because the game uses the A button for a lot of the interactions with the menus as well as giving commands to your units, I've bound that to the middle region here. So whenever I pop and the cursor's in the middle of the screen, it's going to press the A button. Talon wake, back, 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 Talon sleep. So you can see navigating the menus is using the popping sounds on the different regions as well. So there's another mode in this game where you're moving a character around outside of battle and interacting with other characters in the world. In this case, using the D-pad and the discrete inputs with individual pops don't really make sense because you're not moving enough, but you can see that it does kind of work. What I've done instead is have use the walk mode to move the character around, as well as a run mode to go to different speed. Talon Wake, run, Talon Sleep. So the run is using the GTuner input translation to press buttons that are going to push the stick in the 100% direction. The character moves pretty quickly when the analog stick is all the way pushed, so what I've done is also implement a walk mode, which is using the GTuner script to only push the stick 50%. Talon Wake, walk. Talon Sleep. So hopefully you get an idea that the 50% stick direction is a little bit more comfortable and pace for the character to walk around and control it. Obviously the analog stick has many more directions than just the 8 directions that my code is supporting, so you could do something more granular, but a game like this, it seems pretty playable with just those 8. I do think that you could probably do some more interesting things with pushing the stick in more granular amounts in different games, which might be really useful. In this mode, you can also use the camera controls in the same way I was demonstrating during the tactical battle. Talon Wake, pan. Reset camera. Talon Sleep. Finally, the A button also is used here to interact with the world. So popping in the middle will interact with the surroundings. Talon Wake, walk. I'm going to put a link in the description to the code on GitHub here. Because there's other options to learn how to use Talon, I'm not going to go through every single line by line, but I will just point out some of the features that I'm using that might be useful for you if you're trying to do something similar. So on the right hand side, I've got the Talon script file, which just has some of the kind of game specific shortcuts, like resetting the camera, opening the menu, and so on, bound to specific keys that correspond to the Switch controller. I've also got commands for the walk, run, and camera pan, which are bound to specific actions, which is how you bind things to Python code in Talon. So on the left-hand side are the Talon actions, which are written in Python. And for the walking, running, and the camera control, it's just starting Talon cron jobs to periodically check where the mouse cursor is and change the buttons that are being held down correspondingly. I've written some code to take these nested arrays of letters and break up the screen into different regions depending on how many elements are in the array. I've chosen to do this just 3x3 grid that you saw. Obviously you could do this any number of regions. You could have different buttons corresponding to different things on the regions as well, not just directional stuff. This was just sort of the most basic setup that I implemented to make sure that this whole system worked. The code that is splitting up the regions is just some fairly basic Python. The most important thing is that there is an API in Talon to get the XY pixel coordinates of the mouse cursor, which is very useful for this purpose. The other thing that Talon supports is various ways of drawing on the screen. So those pink grids that I was showing, those are all drawn by Talon here with a little bit of code that's using this canvas API to draw both the different regions as well as put some letters on the screen corresponding to the keys that are being pressed. You don't really need this to play the game, and I don't really use it much when I'm actually playing games, but it was pretty useful to debug the system and make sure that I was configuring the right letters in the right positions. The actual holding of the buttons are just calling Talon actions to press the keys down and then let them up, depending on where the cursor is and which keys need to be pressed. So when the cron job sees that or when the cron job wakes up and that little bit of code executes to check the cursor position, I'll just change which keys are being held down and release those, and then hold down the others that might be corresponding to the new region that the cursor is in. I did have to do a couple of slight tweaks here. So when I'm tapping the buttons for the D-pad, you only need to tap it once. For the the analog sticks, I had to kind of make this little hack to hold it down for a short while when I wanted to press the analog stick in one direction, sort of only for a little while, and not actually hold it down for the camera control and walking. This is probably something that you could implement differently. I'm not an expert with Talon, but sort of fiddling around with this stuff and finding some balance for how long you hold things down is pretty common when I've been playing different games, and the Switch is not any different with GTuner and the Titan. Anyway, I hope this was useful or interesting for someone. This is definitely not a cheap setup between the Titan 2 and the capture card. I just want to stress that the capture card's not really, strictly speaking, necessary. As I mentioned, I think you could do the same thing with a PC or a laptop and have the Titan 2 talking to the Switch while the Switch is sending its video to a TV or another display. I just found that having the on-screen cursor to do directional buttons and the analog sticks is just a lot more comfortable for me with the head mouse. You could also do something different with a joystick and combine that with voice commands or something like that with the Titan 2. There are other hardwares out there like the Titan 2. I don't have much experience with them. They're also not cheap, unfortunately, but maybe there's some other options. So if you know of anything, feel free to let me know in the comments. I did experiment with a cheaper capture card, and although the latency actually was fine, with voice controls you often have a little bit of latency anyway, so I wasn't really too worried about that. I did have a lot of graphical glitching and sort of flashing with the capture card, the cheaper capture card that I had, so I ended up buying a more expensive one. I don't know much about streaming and capture cards. There's a lot of options out there, and some of them are not cheap, so obviously this is only really worth it if there's some game you want to play that's only available on consoles. PC gaming is a lot easier to do stuff like this. Anyway, I hope this was interesting, and thanks for watching.